So this video won't be like any of my other videos. This isn't a review, this isn't any gaming news or anything like that. This is just me putting my thoughts down on a video while also having the badass dust gameplay over top of it. But anyways, for a while now, maybe for like a year or two, I've seen people question whether or not gaming in general has been on a decline or has flat out died. From random Twitter user number 5768 to ginormous content creators like Dr. Disrespect.
It's not, I don't know, things just aren't thought out, man. Fuck! There's nothing else to play. I want to play something. I want to have fun.
It just seems like more and more people are discontent with gaming. But for a while, the focus wasn't actually on gaming as a whole, but more rather on AAA gaming like Call of Duty, Madden, 2K, or really any ginormous franchise that once took the world by storm, but has been on a very gradual decline for a couple years. And with that, the most common response I saw to this discussion was, take a look at indie games. There are tens of thousands of games created by hardworking developers who try to create something revolutionary. However, recently, it seems like this topic of discussion was brought up once again, but this time it's towards a more niche category of gaming, that is horror in general. People for the past, I don't know, 2 weeks or so have been saying that horror gaming has either flat out died or is in some kind of life support. And it's not just AAA horror games that have apparently flat out died this time, but also the indie scene too. I've seen viral tweets recently that say stuff like, horror games are dead and FNAF killed them. I love FNAF, but goddamn it ruined horror games. What the fuck is this shit? When discussing games like Amanda the Adventurer relating to FNAF, or horror games are alive and well. We're seeing that with the recent Resident Evil 4 and Dead Space remakes. But indie horror? That's been going down the drain for a while and will continue without the innovation. I'm just tired of people piggybacking off of the success of FNAF. When a discussion about whether or not indie games are dead because they relate too much to FNAF? Hell, there's even videos on YouTube claiming that games like Poppy's Playtime and Garten of Banban ruined the state of modern day horror gaming. And I just believe that is ignorantly wrong. Now, I'm not experienced with the horror game genre. I'm pretty new. In fact, most of my life I've never had the opportunity to explore horror games due to me not having a gaming computer growing up until 2020. And even then, I only really focused on horror games last year. And yes, a lot of my videos on both Skrakes and my now abandoned account Tiredcast, I've played and discussed some less than stellar games. But during that year-long time, I've also played some indie horror games that have entertained me to no end or made me piss my pants out of fear. On top of that, I've seen numerous amounts of indie developers put their heart and soul into a game that they passionately want to create. It's frankly not hard to find these hardworking people and their tremendous games. There are genuinely countless amount of threads and forums where people will share their horror games. But anyways, let's address the elephant in the room and discuss both mascot horror games and shoddy AAA games that have been the focus of attention recently and have been the main focal point for why horror game has apparently been dying. Starting off with AAA horror games, there seems like there's a problem when it comes to technical issues and rushing. Games like Redfall, The Last of Us Remake, and the Callisto Protocol have been primary examples of not good recent AAA games. All of these companies had such reputable development teams behind them, and you know, Iron Galaxy helped too. And all of them were pretty bland if you got rid of the game-breaking bugs and glitches. But it would be unfair to say that this is the reason for horror games' decline. Sure, they're not good games at all, and then add that to the fact that all of those games that I mentioned are not playable, or at least during that time they were not playable. But then you have to consider that there's some really amazing AAA games that have released recently, like the Dead Space remake, or Resident Evil 4's remake, or even Dead Island 2 for that matter. These games have been absolutely wonderful to play. But then there's even more large studio games releasing too, like Amnesia, The Bunker, Outlast Trials, and a lot more. Sure, there is a major, and I mean major problem when it comes to rushing in a lot of AAA studios. And I do believe that needs to have attention, and it needs to be fixed sometime sooner rather than later. But it would be pretty unfair to say that the horror genre is getting the worst end of it, because it's really not. There's been other genres of AAA gaming that have just not been good in the slightest or have been game-breaking with their bugs. Got the first down, even though the foot wasn't... What? Game crashed. And like I said, there definitely needs to be some sort of reformity with large-scale developments, but that's for all genres of gaming, not just horror. Then there's the topic of how newer mascot horror games are blatantly copying its successors, and how that's ruining the indie scene. Of course, that's so far from being true, but there's been more and more people relating the indie scene to older mascot horror games like FNAF, Bendy and the Ink Machine, and Poppy's Playtime. Not only is that also not fair to have the comparison because you just can't compare the indie scene with all of its subgenres to one popular but hated subgenre.
What the hell?
but it's also extremely disrespectful to every developer who puts their everything into game development. Yes, mascot horror is not good. I really fucking don't like it, and I probably will never enjoy a mascot horror game. It's clear that a lot of these games, like Garten of Banban, is made for the sole reason to make money. But just like a bad comment under a YouTube video, or a bad customer during your shift, or even a bad accident when you're driving down the road, of course you're gonna have your attention more placed on it because it has more of a negative connotation behind it. People fucking love looking at train wrecks because it's out of the ordinary and sparks more interest. And that's totally the same with games like Garten of Banban. In fact, if you believe that the indie scene is dying, please in the comment give me some examples of indie games that ruin the scene that are not Garten of Banban, Amanda's Adventure, Bendy, FNAF, Poppy's Playtime, or anything like that. The fact of the matter is that there's over 10,900 games released on Steam in just 2022 alone. And that's not even accounting for Epic Games Launcher, Epic Games Launcher, itch.io, Origin, or anything else. Of course, there will be a dime and a dozen where someone will try to create a game for the sole intention to try to get as much money as they can by taking the easy route, but with that, there's also hundreds, if not thousands of indie horror games that have released that have nothing to do with mascot horror games or with the intention of going through the easy route. The Mortuary Assistant is an example of a game published by DreadXP, the same publisher for Amanda's Adventure, and yet this game is a terrifying psychological horror indie game with having to embalm possessed dead bodies. Another great indie horror game that released recently was Faith the Unholy Trinity, an 8-bit horror game that was released in 2022, and even with its low pixel count, is extremely terrifying with the religion and the cult surrounding it. Hell, there's even an indie horror game releasing this year regarding to a body cam found footage where you have to deal with the supernatural in the woods. I know a lot of people say that the golden age of indie horror was with Slenderman and FNAF, but tell me, have the games I mentioned copied those two in any way? No, because just like any other piece of media in history, the indie horror scene is changing and evolving, with so many people trying to think outside of the box and trying not to copy FNAF. Now, even though I don't like those mascot horror games, there's always the conversation that they will still bring new eyes to the horror scene. We saw that with Slenderman in the 8 pages, and how that public domain sparked many more Slenderman games on top of the standalone fan games, and that's the same with FNAF. There are dozens of fan games that are created because people were introduced to FNAF and fell in love with it.
Be my imagine. All right, Freddy.
Whoa.
You're gonna have to sleep now.
Hey.
Huh?
I don't see how mascot horror games that appeal to kids aren't the exact same as well. These are very mild horror games to make kids feel like they are the toughest shit when it comes to horror, because quite frankly, what parent would ever want their child to look at games like fucking PT? I mean, I would if I was a parent. Either my child is shitting themselves to PT, or they're not my child. But if you were to say that indie horror or horror in general is dying, then why do we have so many fan games being created to show support to a game that they love? Why would eyes be placed on these good or even bad horror games? If horror was dead, wouldn't nobody care about it? And I mean, another video about this topic by Horror Visuals, which I highly recommend you both watch and follow his Twitter because of his interest in promoting these horror games. Anyways, he goes on to explain how he's gotten dozens of DMs from kids who are new to the indie horror scene because of games like Garten of Banban and want to further explore the genre.
You know, the DMs on Horror Visuals on Twitter, they're always open. I sometimes close them because I get overwhelmed because of the attention sometimes, but they're always open. And there have been multiple examples of just minors or younger people playing, I don't know, Five Nights at Freddy's, or watching their favorite YouTuber play Five Nights at Freddy's or other similar games. And they come into my DMs and they're like, "Hey Chief, I played this game. Do you know any other games that are like it?"
All in all, I genuinely think that horror, and indie horror especially, are not dying. I just think that the games that have the most negative reception are the loudest games, the ones that draw the most attention because they're so bad, and the people who are looking at these games just overreact. There are so many people who love making these horror games, and even the ones who create bad horror games are not necessarily bad people. Like, for example, Vitaly with his indie game studio creating his Ebola series. People people like him do this because they found a love for creating these games and just want to grow to make their games better than the previous. And that's all we could really ask for, just improvement, which we are getting. With that said, I'll be leaving in the comments some links to 3 separate threads on Twitter where some great indie games are being promoted. They're all from Horror Visuals, FNAF9, and Resident Evil Central. Amazing people and such nice people who also love the indie horror scene. And I highly recommend that you just take a look on what's upcoming or what's released. Maybe you'll find something you'll enjoy. But other than that, I'm gonna end this video here. Thank you all for watching this very opinionated video of mine. I do enjoy making these videos where I can just lay down my thoughts on a hot topic. So if you guys do like this, maybe hit that like button and subscribe, and maybe I'll do this in the future. But other than that, I will see you all in a later video. Bye for now.